weapon durability, limited inventory, emphasis on combat, linear levels. I think we all know what the F stands for. Welcome back, Silent Hill 4.
Finally, it's gonna happen!
Oh man, that was awesome.
Henry Townsend does look a bit different to how I remember him though. And we seem to have graduated from The Room too, which is actually quite fitting because you spend hardly any time at all in any actual rooms, instead wandering through beautifully atmospheric yet painfully linear forest paths in a town that really is gorgeous but little more than set dressing to get us from Monster A to Monster B. Okay, so it's not Silent Hill 4 to the not room. At first glance, it's actually something quite different. So different, I often found myself wondering why it was even called Silent Hill in the first place. Not to say it doesn't live up to its themes, but where is the Silent Hill? Because last time I checked, it wasn't Ebisugaoka, Japan. Well, it wasn't South Ashfield Heights either, but I managed to make the case for its presence there, so let's see if I can do the same for Ebisugaoka, because of course there is a lot of Silent Hilling going on, from deeply personal character introspection to shady religious orders. To give you a quick rundown if you're entirely unfamiliar with this premise, Silent Hill F follows 1960s high schooler Hinako Shimizu, journeying through her hometown as it is being plagued by the cerebral and introspective fogs of, well, Silent Hill. All the while reconciling with consequences and changes to her life following an arranged marriage, which has inadvertently put her at the centre of a centuries-old conflict between her town's Shinto deities, one worshipped and revered, the other forgotten and long sealed away. Altogether emblemizing a change in society that was occurring in Showa-era Japan at the national level. As I talked about in my retrospective though, Silent Hill, on the surface, is about balancing two strong motifs on horror. That of personal psychological trauma, and the slightly more traditional exploration of evil religious cults in sleepy backwater towns. F generally delivers on this, something we'll explore fully a bit later, as well as all of its connections to Silent Hill as a whole. But when it comes to gameplay, we're in pretty different territory. There's a dedicated third-person Resident Evil-style camera strapped to Hinako's back, there's bigger emphasis on dodging and counter-attacking, you get a God of War Spartan Rage mode, and for the most part the player is having their hand held quite hard. I'm sorry, I can't help myself. I am going to start this video by talking about why I don't like the game part. But I do want to make it clear now that it's by no means bad. Yes, I might have preferred it if it had remained a janky horror game from the early 2000s, but let that not be its unmaking. It has its failings, but also its merits, and in the wider context of Silent Hill and its thematic prowess, it provides us with a deep and interesting world with plenty to chew on, regardless of how heavy-handed and unambiguous it's sometimes presented. We even managed to break free from some of the chains that were set by James's world-famous foray into his own psyche as we move away from the psychological profile of the singularly guilty towards the combined societal weight of resentment and frustration, a society that fails its women and men constantly. This new territory comes to us from a new team, most notably helmed by Japanese VN legend Ryukishi 07, best known for the psychological murder mystery Higurashi When They Cry. If you're a fan of his work, his trademarks can be found all over Ebisugaoka. I mean, all over. So much so, I often found myself wondering why this game wasn't called Higurashi the pre-sequel. I guess Silent Hill is a little more stock in the West. Anyway, that's a video for another time. Let's focus on Hushed Mounds. It's a tall order to take up the mantle of a cult classic series like Silent Hill, and I did eventually have a lot of fun exploring Hinako's brain. So let's get into how it compares to its namesakes from gameplay to its narrative. As I said in the intro, this game is beautiful. Hinako's bob never loses its luster, and visually, Ebisugaoka presents an enthusiastic and authentic portrayal of 1960s Japan, minus all the fungus and spores and deeply worrying psychological manifestations that prowl its streets. The aesthetic presentation on display is phenomenal and incorporates numerous elements of Japanese tradition in its delivery. But no matter how beautiful it was, I never felt like I really got to explore it, even after 4 playthroughs. Silent Hills 1, 2 and 3 aren't the most open-ended games in the world, but you start to feel really familiar with Silent Hill as a setting, even if you've only played one of them. Setting is incredibly important to these games, and there was a tremendous sense of uneasiness exploring its foggy streets for the first time, especially without any quest director in the top left telling where to go or what to do. Things had a natural way of falling into place, allowing an immersion into its setting that F just doesn't really afford you. Most of the game's buildings are locked off to you, and there's almost always something pushing you forward to the next objective. The pace is high, and this offers you few moments to be a part of Ebisugaoka, leaving it feeling more like a set than a town. I was constantly looking out for secrets to rooms off the beaten path, and was disappointed at almost every single turn. Compare that against the Silent Hill of Maine, USA, where even today I still remember the names of streets and locations, like Backman Road, Neely's Bar, and Heaven's Night. And I don't think this is because it's in a more familiar Western setting either. Take the Persona series, for example. The nooks and crannies of Tatsumi Port Island, Inaba, and even Tokyo very quickly become second nature. Obviously these are RPGs which permit you more time with an environment, but F does ask you to play through its world about 4 different times. There is so much potential for strong, immersive world building, but even when you do backtrack through its areas, it feels railroaded and unimportant. You're not there to do anything, just go from point A to point B with few reasons for ever trying to go off the beaten path. Sakiko's family shrine is visited but never interacted with, and none of the characters' homes are explored fully beyond Hinako's. For all the life in the journal and notes, Ebisugaoka as a space failed to capture my heart. Maybe this is something to do with the overall focus of the game, which we'll get to shortly, but with how much love that has gone into its facade, it's a shame to see the rest of it feel so unrealised. It was also really difficult to drink in when I was constantly being chased through its environments and waking up in F's other world, the Dark Shrine, which had little identity outside of Shinto-induced psychosis. I understand its narrative and thematic purpose, but it never comes close to being as disturbing or unsettling as Team Silent's own vision of the Nightmare Realm. Something that distorted and twisted your perception of a once familiar environment, entwined with puzzle-based exploration. The original Otherworld was actually far lazier than F's Dark Shrine 2, yet still somehow more compelling, maybe because of its interconnectedness, rather than a zone in complete isolation to the rest of the game. F isn't completely devoid of puzzles/based exploration, namely the middle school level, which for me is the best the game ever is, in part because of its brief understanding of what survival horror should deliver on. It's a section that is really reminiscent of the other games, and is filled with interesting tidbits, item backtracking, and a couple of really creepy scares that end all too soon. And then it's followed by one of my least favourite bits in the whole game, where you encounter memories of spaces familiar to Hinako in the Dark Shrine, which should be interesting, but are instead filled with haunted house level jump scares. This is in part why I opened this video with a joke about this being like The Room, because these are some of the exact complaints I had while playing Silent Hill 4. Its worst levels were linear forward sprints, and its best were buildings that barely held a candle to the experiences of 1's Alchemilla Hospital, 2's Brookhaven, or 3's Hilltop Center. Maybe people hate this, but I love finding a key somewhere and realizing it fits into a roadblock you encountered at the start of the level, or finding mysterious and seemingly inconsequential items, shoving them into your inventory, only for them to enable further exploration down the line. As simple as it is rewarding. Get thing, eventually use thing, progress. It's even better when these things are gross, mysterious, creepy, or even world-building. The first Silent Hill does this really well, tying in discoverable items into its good ending, and Silent Hill 3 does it even better, with the entwining of the Stanley Coleman side story in the puzzle exploration of Brookhaven Hospital. In terms of actual sit-down-and-think puzzles, F services this itch okay. They do at least intertwine with a lot of the Japanese mythology the game is trying to put in place, which does lend it something a little more distinct, but otherwise there is very little challenge throughout its difficulties. Lost in the Fog difficulty, for example, didn't require any reading of Shakespeare. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, but the borderline esoteric intuition needed in the older ones was at least funny. One of F's hard mode puzzles just has you selecting more fruit. At the very least, we're one up on The Room, given that to my memory, there aren't really any puzzles, just backtracking at its most tedious. The rest of the game is sadly emblematic of all the failings of AAA games. At least that's what I think, because it should be no secret, I don't really like to play AAA titles. I tend to avoid them because they do things like update your current objective every 5 seconds, railroad you constantly, hand-fist almost everything it has to say, and give you stupid God of War powers to make you really feel like a Japanese schoolgirl. Why oh why am I going Super Saiyan in a Silent Hill game? Never in my time in James's shoes did I think what he really needed to overcome the trauma of killing his wife was a power fantasy that involved him entering wife killer mode. All this ever served was to disconnect me from the game's story and themes. As for combat as a whole, this has been a massive sticking point in conversation around the game, and with good reason. Just like the 4th entry, a bigger emphasis is placed on it, this time with dodging and counterattacking in place. I personally didn't find it too taxing, you do get the hang of it pretty quickly, but god was that camera awful. Not to mention that a lot of the mandatory combat sequences felt pretty ill thought out. I was stun-locked plenty of times by the screaming doll enemies, which always ruined the building tension in a sequence. The thing that was most frustrating to me though was the fundamental misunderstanding of what long-term fans wanted from the game. Nobody comes to Silent Hill for this, in the same way I don't think anybody gaffed about the combat changes to the room. As a series, it's just never been known or revered because of its combat. I mean, Shattered Memories opts to forego it completely, and the series as a whole has always known this, by opting to give you 2 completely separate difficulty sliders, one for puzzles and one for combat. F does continue to champion this staple, but totally falls short on delivering on either of these gameplay aspects. Some of the puzzles are narratively interesting, sure, but for the most part aren't particularly tricky or thought-provoking, and the combat lacks all of the finesse of games where combat is a priority, which is weird because it really acts as though it is. Overall, I guess I don't have a problem with trying to make it a little more interesting, it's just that the emphasis on detracts from the elements of survival horror that I prefer. I think what also surprised a lot of people was Hineko's actual combat prowess too. But I think her animations actually do it justice, in her stressy and jerky movements. Also, it's not like Harry, James and Heather are exactly seasoned veterans, and they didn't really have much difficulty in Silent Hill either. I mean, Henry Townsend was just some guy bumming around his apartment all day. Okay, Silent Hill F, maybe 3 variations on the doll creature was a little excessive. I feel like I wouldn't have minded so much if 1, they weren't so tanky, and 2, I hadn't been forced to fight them all the time. There is no escaping your demons in F, try stabbing them 100 times with a kitchen knife instead. Credit where credit is due though, despite the lack of variety, Kara's monster designs are phenomenal, and so in line with what we have come to expect from Silent Hill. Evocative and disturbing imagery lies at the forefront, the same nuance that was brought to the other games by Ito. Where James's monsters reflect his guilt and his sin, Hineko's begin to show off disdain for the making of her society. The bloody and beaten dolls seek to inflict the same pain brought onto themselves, and the lickers attack on impulse, unable to restrain unsavory urges. Hineko's worldview is most obvious when we see the breeder nest enemies, a hulking mass of eggs atop a fusion of a man and a woman, apparently helpless against the base conditions of our species. I don't know why I ate my S when I said species, but anyway. Just like the other games, the analysis has potential to run deep, with F bringing even more to the discussion thanks to its integration of Japanese mythology and setting. To give a quick example, the licker enemy mentioned before actually takes on the form of the Gaki yokai, as represented by his ever-hungering swollen belly. I think Kara by and large did an amazing job with what does appear in the game. I just wish she'd been able to flex more of her creative muscle. The scope is pretty small, and compared with the onslaught of monsters seen throughout main, and again all the mandatory combat sequences, F falls really short for me here. Okay, so obviously we are a far cry from Team Silent's work, but there are still plenty of similarities to satisfy that I didn't mention or compare to in the previous sections. For example, the game is filled with incredibly compelling performances that harken back to some of the awkward Lynchian direction of Silent Hill 2 and 3. And there's a really great soundtrack from Kensuke Inage, as well as our very own Yamaoka, with additional music from Ryukishi mainstays Dai and Zaki. For the most part I really enjoyed it, only growing tired on repeat ramp-ups during monster encounters. The overall sound design, atmosphere and ambience is good too, and there are some classic Silent Hill diegetic sounds and sequences to keep you on your toes, something I was really looking out for while playing. It's not quite as terrifying as but it'll do. As a whole, I just would have loved more freedom to enjoy these moments, to wander about lost and afraid through Episagaoka, to let Hinako's nightmare really take hold. F felt weirdly unrestrained, but in the worst ways. I would have preferred a gentler, slower experience. But Otter, don't you have to play the game like 4 times to learn everything? Not slow enough for you? Well, okay, yeah, that's slow, but in all the wrong ways. It's certainly interesting, and I know it's Ryukishi, but in the end, all I felt was tedium trying to get through the forced combat for new cutscenes, only to find that the only thing different was some mold on the staircase.
Okay.
The game does try to speed things along, but when you're trying to do comprehensive research for a video that you don't actually end up making, you check every single twist and turn regardless. God forbid I miss a diary entry. Okay, obviously by the end the cutscenes are pretty dramatically different, and the insight is worth seeing, but I'm not sure what is gained from replaying the worst parts of the game. Editor's note, this was written at a time before they patched a lot of the boring bits out. I'm glad that going forward others will not have to suffer as I did. Okay, so you know when I said I didn't want to paint F as a bad game? Well, it's kind of hard not to when I'm comparing it to some of my favourite games ever, but I do hope the glimmers of its merit shone through during my rambling. It does make up for a lot of its shortcomings with its deeply layered and thoughtful story, one broaching themes of society, family and feminism head-on, intertwined with an exploration of tradition and Shinto spiritualism, things deeply ingrained into Japan. What's most interesting about F is that where these Eastern influences lay more under the surface of the original games, by virtue of them being set in America, here they flourish to their full potential. Encompassed by a lot of the better parts in the game's design, F's approach to its history, story and themes is deeply interesting and something that we can now finally talk about. I want to preface this section by saying that I had initially intended to do a massive video looking at everything that F wanted to say, in particular its connection to Japanese heritage, but as you should all by now know, I'm incredibly lazy, and by the time my research and writing had taken off, this guy made a video encompassing most of what I had endeavoured to talk about, far more polished and succinct than anything I felt I could have delivered. So if you want a comprehensive look at the game singularly with all of Japan's historical and religious context in place, this video is a must-watch. But for now, I will bridge it in brief, as well as investigating F's place in the wider canon of Silent Hill. Also, I have a cat on my lap, I don't know if you can hear it purring, but I don't want to move her, so... It's important to recognise that there's so much more to F than the themes that had everyone crying pathetically on Twitter. F, after all the fog, is ultimately an exploration of the long-standing traditions of Japan and the power we have to change such tradition, not set singularly against just the backdrop of gender struggles, as we will soon come to discover. Yes, Hinako's own struggle is a personal one that does reflect women's domestic and societal struggles, but through her family and her friends, we are given a wider examination on the plight of everyone in Japan, both men, women, and Shintogami, the ever-evolving nuclear model seen through the lens of the Showa era. The game's other themes focus further on ideas of faith, tradition, and society, and how the cyclical nature of abuse is perpetuated, which in part is why I imagine you have to go through the game so many times. Hinako challenges various versions of her identity in search of a reconciliation with a marriage that is in part arranged by her abusive father to pay off the family debt, but also a long-standing tryst with the Kitsune Kami, something that has had a grip on Episagaoka for a very long time, the guilt, anger, and mystical influence of which makes up the majority of her motivation for journeying through her inner psyche. In her adolescent friendships, we begin to see the complexity of the game's narrative threads. For example, Rinko is the portrait of a girl who is struggling with burgeoning feelings of romance, as well as resentment towards Hinako as she attempts to reign control over her life, perpetuating the ideals of a society that make her feel small and cold. So small that she's acting like a petulant teenager, as is everyone else, when in actuality the game's main characters are in their 20s, revealed to us by the first ending, which gives further credence to the nightmarish nature of the game too. And Shu, Hinako's closest friend who thinks he knows best for her, also struggles with these same complicated feelings, and chooses to assert himself as a male in her life, assuming control of Hinako by plying her with drugs he's been making in a shed behind his house, which inevitably forms a massive part of her psychological breakdown. Both of Hinako's parents are met with her ire at their resignation to the patterns of domestic life, but the more you play, the more you learn about her father, abusive and drunk yes, but also at the mercy of the failure of his business due to reasons out of his control, in part because of a backstabbing partner, but also the illness of his wife, whom he was struggling to support, revealed in the game's final, true ending, unknown to Hinako. He by no means is forgiven, but we are reminded how easy it is to succumb to weakness in the face of society and tradition, especially when dealt the hard hand of fate. These, after all, are hard chains to break. Subsequent playthroughs reveal more of the importance of Shinto and tradition to the game, as traditional Japanese views on marriage are explored and challenged, in that of the rebirth of a woman's life into subservience to their husbands, represented in Hinako's dreamlike submission to Fox Mask and the Dark Shrine. Quick side note, it's important to remember that this does take place during the Showa era, which was facilitating a huge amount of change, as well as westernization in Japan. I don't want to pick these views out as solely Japanese, when, the nuclear model exists. We see these views also in the walking corpse that is Junko, who tries to spur Hinako towards her same fate. In Ending 2, Hinako gives up her fight completely and accepts a life with Fox Mask, quite literally losing her face. Eurothug 4000 points out in her analysis the connection between this mask and No Theatre, a Japanese tradition dating back to the 14th century that often explored supernatural transformations, another instance where the game is further entwined into folklore. This is all played against the religion of Ebisugaoka itself, which at one point had managed to shift its worship away from one kami to another. Initially, the town was in fearful worship of a poisonous water dragon, which may or may not have had something to do with the toxic gas leaks that have both plagued and protected Ebisugaoka throughout its long history. One day, in the Kamakura period, a giant monk showed up and said, if you want to be free of the dragon, worship this tree instead. Thus, divine tree worship emerged, quickly becoming conflated with reverence, respect, and care of old tools, owing to the warring soldiers using the town as a hideout in the Kamakura period, unable to leave their refuge. This transformed their worship into that of the Tsukumogami faith, which shifted again in the Edo period after lightning struck the divine tree, leaving the villagers to worship the next oldest thing, a statue of Inari-sama. Sometime in the Meiji era, this same monk returns. Furious at the shift in worship towards Inari-sama, he attacks and kills 3 townsfolk before becoming encircled by a group of foxes and disappearing in a fog. And in 1960, the end result is Hinako's betrothal to Fox Mask. Kotayuki, a boy from her childhood, possessed by the spirit of a malevolent kitsune, a means to continue the Tsuneki family's fox cult worship. A family who are basically like Ebisugaoka's order. Like Mayumi, another girl spirited away and vanished from the village, Hinako's fate is likely to be sacrificed to the fox god. I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but Kotayuki, just like everyone else, is denied his own agency. He is the bastard child of the Tsunekis, forced to return by his mother as their power waned, and don't forget that he's literally possessed. Of the people around Hinako, few are truly malicious or evil, a notion that F explores profoundly in its multifaceted characters. And what's left of divine tree worship comes in the form of the Senensugi Shrine, run by Sakuga's family, and a faith that she one day dreams of restoring. Her old and lonely shrine is often looked over in favor of Inari, whose statues can be found all over town. Like Hinako, Sakuga is also spiritually inclined, and was visited by both deities in her sleep, prompted by Tsukumogami to restore the faith, and then threatened by Inari-sama if she were to agree. Okay, I know that was basically a crash course in Ebisugaoka's religious history, but I do feel like that was important to know. Basically, this is where much of the point of the town's worship in relation to its themes is made clear. In-game documents tell us, by this time the ideologies of the Tsukumogami faith had taken root, and sacredness was now determined by the antiquity of an object. The divine tree was not worshipped for subduing the water dragon, instead, it was only due to the fact that it was the oldest object in the area. Essentially, do the divine tree or Inari and the foxes deserve reverence purely by virtue of their age? The same thing can be asked of the traditions of betrothal, the attitudes towards gender, the constant posturing by Hinako's father in being a stronger man than he is. No, more than anything, the rules of tradition are born out of necessity, something the game is never shy to point out. Clearly a tradition born of necessity in a hidden village of defeated soldiers. The blocks in place are not hard and fast rules, nor are they sacred, especially when amongst the game's exploration of this is the use of spells, secret elixirs and potions, possession, murder, ritual sacrifice, and constant exploitation of others. As such, Hinako's personal tale of abuse and resentment couples well with the game's wider exploration of Japan at a time of great change, felt not just in domestic life, but on a national level too. Okay, so the similarities to the rest of Silent Hill canon should by now be pretty obvious. Earlier I talked about how the two main pillars of Silent Hill are psychological profiles and evil religious cults. And this is what we spent the last several pages discussing. Once again, in brief, underpinning everything is the Tsuneki family, a wealthy religious cult who Hinako is supposed to be marrying into. And there is a wider exploration of religion and its symbols too in the Shinto roots that run through the entire game, just like the Abrahamic imagery of the original games. The actual cult part is far smaller than the order, but the godly religious presence is felt throughout. Where Silent Hill tended to focus more on the people of these cults, F is far more explicit in its divinity. And of course there are blurred lines of reality, evidenced not just by the fog, but also by the actions taken by Hinako and her various endings. Moments which harken back to sequences like,
"They looked like monsters to you?"
I sort of opened the door to the psychological relevance of F, which again goes without saying fits into Silent Hill no problem, but there are some really interesting things that I want to highlight, things present throughout the series but now made even clearer. The game being set in the Showa era got me thinking. This was a time when Japan was dismantling a lot of their hard and fast traditions as a result of American occupation and legislation following the Second World War. This was a cultural shift on the national level, and here we see some of these waves in real time. Jump to 2002 and we see remnants of these waves and ripples when the biggest horror games out of Japan are set in the United States. But as Asa Aesthetic points out, though the facade of Silent Hill came from American horror novels, movies and television, the roots of Eastern tradition do remain, in that of the Shinto idea of impurity, Kegare. This is our linking theme that connects F deeply to the other games as it too explores our impurities. Just want to quickly give credit where credit is due. Asa Aesthetic was the first person I saw talking about the idea of Kegare in relation to Silent Hill, and some of the foundation of what I'm about to discuss comes from his video. So please check it out, it's some of the most thoughtful and insightful analysis on Silent Hill I've ever seen. In traditional Shinto, the impurity described by Kegare are the mistakes of immature souls and can be washed away permanently through purification, the pursuit of which being one of the core pillars of Shinto. Kegare is also found in the negative energy emitted by decaying bodies, or wicked minds and evil spirits. Buddhism would develop on these notions of impurity, further conflating it with disease, blood, feces and urine. Followers of Shinto view it as a semi-substance that exists as invisible memory within our collective unconscious, felt strongest by those with psychic affinity, just like Hinako. The perception of corruption blooming throughout the town comes in part from her own psyche and trauma, but is also spurred on by the semi-substance of the town's memory, in the corrupt religious officials, the monk killings, and its feudal history that saw desperate samurai searching for a cursed blade left by the previously mentioned vagabonds in hiding. As well as this is the Shinto idea of mononoke, that couples often with Kegare. Mononoke is the term used for the lower level vibrations, mischievous spirits akin to the negative products of malicious thoughts. The Essence of Shinto by Motohisa Yamakage, which has been my main source for my understanding of it, tells us that those with strong psychic ability often see Mononoke as a fog-like presence. For the first time ever, I'd argue that the source of the fogs of Silent Hill are as clear as day. Without overstating what's already been said, the corruption and negativity of malicious thought come from Hinako's woes and fears around marriage, the behaviour of her parents which in turn trickles down to her, the petulant repressed feelings of her friends. Hinako's very collaboration with the trickster Kitsune in-game is inherently polluted on account of the Fox cult being known practitioners of female sacrifice. Retroactively looking at the entire series through this Eastern lens begins to bring us more context to Silent Hill as a whole. In the first game, our conduit for the prevalence of Kegare and Mononoke is Alessa, who is used and manipulated by her mother, the High Priestess of the Order, in pursuit of birthing a god to usher in a paradise. As such, Harry's foray into Silent Hill is manifest of her trauma, in the form of horrific renditions of the doctors and staff that help to keep her captive, as well as bugs and insects, emblematic not just of the fears of a little girl, but the stagnated and impure nature of the town. Remember that the impurities of Kegare are not always personal, and can affect others around it too. In the second game, we have to accept James's psychic affinity as the impure memory of the town intertwines with his own permeating guilt, like the town's violent history with its now extinct indigenous population, and a mysterious epidemic that further wrought its population in the 1800s. These are the town's echoes of dirty semi-substance, all which mingle with James's own dirt, in part appearing in the form of the nurses and Pyramid Head. Interestingly, 2 is the only game that offers a shared and singular psychosis for its visitors, as Angela and Eddie each are offered their own personal twisted visions, backed by the fogs of the town. And in 3, there's no doubt that Heather too is inclined to higher vibrations of perception as she battles a darker version of herself, much like the inner conflict that Hinako is going through. And don't forget the far-reaching nightmare conjured up by Walter Sullivan in the room. His polluted body, stained by his suffering at the hands of the Order in Silent Hill, becomes a hotbed for Kegare, pulling Henry into the dream. Evidence of the strength of the semi-substance described in Shinto teaching. In my other Silent Hill video, it feels like I was actually starting to broach this, just without any of the necessary historical context to understand it. Essentially, in that video, I talked about the staining power of memory, and I think this by and large can be traced back to these religious ideals that go back centuries. And for the first time, we get these at the forefront, rather than subconsciously. Although the ultimate goal of these games isn't to exactly cleanse yourself through traditional Shinto practices, there are still adherences to it, however subconscious. The true ending of the first game revolves around the use of aglaophotis, a herby concoction said to dispel evil spirits, not unlike the use of plants in misogi, rituals of purification. And in 3, this same concoction reappears, ingested by Heather to dispel quite literally the impurity that has been plaguing her. Water purification is another big part of misogi, and when we look at James and his in-water ending, we see again the fundamentals of Shinto appear, in that James seeks to cleanse himself of his sin in water, albeit by suicide, which ironically would leave him uncleansed, as death itself is a form of Kegare. And to bring this back to F, when we look up in a family living room during the final level of the game, we see the shadow of waves bouncing against the walls, Hinako deep in the pursuit of her own spiritual purification in a town that has long succumbed to its corruption and taint. Okay, I want to quickly round this section off by talking a bit about the idea of evil. I mentioned earlier that F explores evil in a really interesting way, and I also think it aligns with Silent Hill as a whole, and its Shinto undertones. Shinto does not view human souls as with absolute sin. They are gifts from the kami and therefore perfect and flawless, which in turn is why Kegare is something to be cleansed and purified of, as though it was something to be physically removed. As such, F's characters should all eventually be viewed through this same lens, only becoming obscured by the stains of the world in which they live. Though they do wrong things, rarely are they evil for evil's sake. There is some goodness to be found, or at least can be viewed through in the context in which they live. This harkens back mostly to Silent Hill 2, where James and his cohorts are far from plainly evil. James might be a wife killer, but we come to understand the context of which something like this can occur, how people come to do bad things, and how it then manifests in the impure semi-substance of Kegare. I don't think James is the villain of his story, and by the way, I resent you if you think he is. Just like Angela and Eddie, who both rage against their abusers, inflicting harm onto them, I don't think it would be fair to call these two characters evil. Maybe this one's a stretch, but even Walter Sullivan from 4, who is an actual serial killer, deep down is a damaged kid twisted by years of abuse. But his soul, I think, is good, or at the very least, tainted, which is something that is at the heart of Shinto. I'm kind of broaching back into stuff I've already talked about now, but I do think it's interesting to consider Kegare as an imposition on the characters of Silent Hill, rather than its characters as unabashedly bad people. Does this make sense? Does any of this make sense? I hope so. Anyway, let's move on. Outside of the game's thematic similarities, there are other things that help keep us closely tied to the franchise. One such connection is the revelation that the pills Shu has been plying Hinako with contain White Claudia, the same substance found in the PTV drug from the first game, and a plant which supposedly makes up part of the agapholotis. In F, we learn that this medicine is a hallucinogenic and has long been used to facilitate introspection. Unfortunately, in Hinako's first ending, it leaves her utterly powerless to confront the powers that be. In subsequent cycles, we learn that this very medicine was brought over by Christian missionaries in the 1500s, which has led to community speculation that early sects of the Order might even have had something to do with the plant getting to Ebisu-Gaoka in the first place. I sort of mentioned this earlier, but another connection I keep thinking of is what Vincent says to Heather in the third game. In relation to context we get at the end of F's first ending. This has long been considered a valid interpretation into the actuality of everything that transpires in Silent Hill, and though ambiguous then, in F we are able to take it as a part truth, that to Hinako, the people of her life really did look like monsters, be it as a result of hallucinogenic plants, or simply because of the way society had twisted them. In Silent Hill F, we see Ebisu-Gaoka as a town in stagnation, perpetuating cycles of harm, wrestling desperately with its rituals. This is embodied by the ideals of Shintoism, which tell us that this pursuit of purification is not just a physical cleansing of Kegare, but also the pursuit of clarity in the mind, something that is emblemized by every single game in the franchise, which, again, should go without saying. Ultimately, F concludes uniquely in a reconciliation with tradition and faith. Hinako finally breaks through to the Kitsune Kami and Dakota Yuki, bearing her soul as plainly as she can. The ultimate sentiment is far from anti-marriage. It's an affirmation to be able to do things on your own terms, free of the societal structures and pressures that make up a tremendous part of the game's dressing. Okay, I think that's everything I had to say, so let's finally put Silent Hill and Hinako Shimizu to rest. Or, if we were adhering to Eastern convention, Shimizu Hinako. Wait a second, those initials? S-H. Oh my god. Okay, that's the end of the video, and I wanted to try and talk to my audience off script a little more candidly than I normally do, just to try and, I don't know, help with my own confidence and just say a couple of things. Firstly, as always, thank you so much for watching and making it this far if you did. It means the world to me. 2, I cannot believe how long this video has taken me. I mean, even now I'm only at the recording stage. I still have to edit the whole video, but I'm praying I manage to get this out by the end of December. We will see. I'll leave a note for myself in the video if I do. But yeah, this one was really messy, and I'm very self-conscious of how messy it was. As I mentioned, like sort of earlier in the video, I had so many other plans and ideas for this. I was initially going to do like a massive investigation into the game's endings, into Shintoism, into everything, but I was just too slow and people were getting to it before me, and I was losing confidence a bit. And then I saw that absolutely phenomenal video, I can't remember the creator's name right now, but I mentioned it earlier, of that guy with a very excellent background in Japanese history and customs, and I thought, fuck, this is so much better than anything I could put out. So what I instead tried to do was come at it from a slightly different angle, to talk about it sort of in relation to the series and themes that, I don't know, I just wanted to talk about. I think, you know, when you're a content creator, it's really scary. The thought of copying people or repeating things that have been said is terrifying, and I really didn't want to do that. So I did try very hard to sort of draw upon content creators that I like and care about, and draw upon ideas in the community, and making it my own or different or whatever. Something I value tremendously out of this video was actually all the learning I did about Shintoism, and goodness, did I say that word a lot during the video, but whatever. I actually had, I'm not normally a super spiritual person, but I actually had a very spiritual experience while I was recording the video, or just the other day. I was laying in bed on my phone, and I saw a fox at my door. I leave my bedroom door open for my cat, so he can come and go. And I saw a fox that had come in through the garden, and he said hello to me at my door. And I got up to make sure it wasn't still in the house, and I felt so tremendously full. I don't know, I kind of just became obsessed with this idea that Inari-sama themselves had come and said hello to me. And I'll put a little picture on screen of the shrine I made to say thank you for that. But I thought that was nice to share. But either way, I hope you enjoyed listening to me. Anyway, I'm just really glad that I finally had this done, and I'm super looking forward to working on other stuff. I really would like to get to a point where I can make these full-time, or at the very least not have to work retail, because it's hideous. But yeah, thank you so much. Happy holidays. And I think the next one will be the Elden Ring Part 2, because I feel like I owe that to some people, namely Billy Boy, my number one fan. But otherwise, I really would like to do some more sort of talking videos down the line, a little looser, kind of talking more candidly like this. I want to do one on the Portal games, which I got really into last year, playing all the fan mods, which are phenomenal, and just Valve as a whole. But I don't really have an angle for that. I think I just want to gush about it, and I don't know if anyone wants to hear me gush about games. Maybe they do, we will find out. And I want to do the same for Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, which is probably my favorite game ever. I have all the footage recorded for that, and I'm gonna just talk about it. But anyway, this has been nice. Thank you so much. God, I wonder how many times I said thank you in this little outro. Okay, well, gotta end this at some point. So again, thank you and goodbye.